When William and Catherine quietly acquired Forest Lodge, they weren't just signing papers. They were sending a message the old-fashioned way, without a press blast, without theatrics, without a single word out of place. A calm arrival at embodies, a stately Windsor estate where the brickwork remembers history and the hedges are trimmed like sentences in a royal diary. No noise, only signal. And it carried. Across the ocean, that silence sounded like a drum. For Meghan, this wasn't about square footage. It was about weight, power, continuity, the kind of permanence that turns a house into a chapter in the national story. Montecito photographs beautifully. The lawns glow, the hallways gleam. The California light kisses every frame. But lately, in Meghan's mind, the place has begun to feel like something harsher than luxury. A beautiful boundary. Because, for all the deals and photo essays and sit-downs, there's an ingredient she can't purchase: legacy. Forest Lodge is legacy by design. It doesn't posture. It doesn't lobby. It simply exists where the monarchy has always breathed. Quietly, ceremonially, on time. And in the public imagination, that reads as dignity. Catherine doesn't push her brand down the timeline. She lets it gather on its own. She shows up, performs the duty, smiles for exactly as long as the moment requires, then retreats to the life that isn't for display. The British public has noticed. They reward restraint when the crown wears it well. For Meghan, sources say, this felt less like a property headline and more like a verdict. She sees the photographs of boxes entering a Windsor driveway and feels the story settling in. Catherine at home on royal ground, William striding toward an expected future, the machine humming as designed. The version of life Meghan once imagined, elegance, privacy, status with roots, now seems to be living under Catherine's keys. Harry, reportedly, does not help turn the page. The reminders arrive uninvited. Videos of balcony salutes, a cathedral bell, a uniform at attention, a Commonwealth smile. He knows what those symbols weigh because he wore them. He also knows what they cost to leave. When a royal moment trends, the air in Montecito changes. The past sits down at the kitchen table and refuses to move. Resentment is a poor counselor, but it speaks loudly. And when it speaks, it rarely suggests patience. Catherine's answer is not a statement. It never is. Her weapon, if one can call it that, is a manner, the economy of gesture, the refusal to chase. Her silence keeps stealing the scene. Meghan, by contrast, must keep explaining. On podcasts, in profiles, through carefully placed phrases that ask the audience to look again, look deeper, look fairer. The more she explains, the more the public compares. And comparisons, once they set in, are stubborn things. Every image of Forest Lodge functions like a soft victory lap for William and Catherine, and, by extension, a reminder to the Sussexes. That narrative is a house with its own deeds. If you do not live inside it, it will not keep you warm. That's why the whispers are louder now, not just in tabloids but in drawing rooms where the curtains never twitch. The talk of titles, always there, often dismissed, has stepped closer to the center of the table. Why, some ask, should a couple so distant from the work still benefit from the styling of the work? If loyalty is the rent the crown charges, what happens when the rent goes unpaid? Here is the fear Meghan understands, maybe better than anyone. Without titles, the brand changes temperature. The air thins. The invitations travel a different route. Work can continue, of course. It always can. But the word Duchess does, something a publicist can't. Remove it, and the story must walk on its own legs. Meghan built a modern persona on being both in and out, both rebel and royal. If the formal label disappears, so does the paradox that made interviews lean forward and cameras linger a second longer. Inside Montecito, the scenery hasn't changed. Sun, on the pool, lawns behaving, doors whispering shut. but insiders say something in the atmosphere has. Confidence, once constant, flickers. Meghan is said to move like a person rehearsing two speeches. The one you give if the titles stay, the one you give if they don't. She scrolls, she notes, she replays, she edits the past to see if the future will budge. It doesn't. Meanwhile, Catherine keeps doing the one thing that cannot be manufactured: time served quietly. None of this requires a palace proclamation. The monarchy excels at the non-announcement, at letting space imply the policy. William and Catherine's move landed as a masterclass in that language. No leaks, no chaos, simply a forward step that every watcher understood. The press called it tasteful. Courtiers called it wise. Even critics had to admit, as optics go, it was unassailable, and that is the hard mathematics facing Meghan and Harry now. Noise can be made quickly. Trust cannot. If the Crown is playing the long game, as it always does, then Forest Lodge is not a house, but a sentence in a paragraph that ends with King. Meghan can produce moments. Catherine can accrue seasons. The public sees the difference. And once the public sees, it is very hard to unsee. The talk about titles used to live on the fringes, comment sections, late-night panels, the corners of tabloids that trade in provocation. Lately, according to well-placed voices, it has migrated inward. Advisors now frame it not as punishment, but preservation. The Crown must guard its symbols the way a museum guards light. Too much exposure fades the fabric. Why allow a styling that no longer reflects the work behind it? In that logic, Duke and Duchess becomes a borrowed uniform that ought to be returned to the wardrobe. Donors and power players read the room early. The ones who once bet on the Sussex brand as the modern bet, fresh, disruptive, marketable, have grown discreet. A few have stepped away openly. More have simply stopped returning calls. They are not unkind. They are cautious. Relevance is their currency, and it must compound. If titles weaken or vanish, alignment looks less like foresight and more like sentimentality. Boards do not pay for sentimentality. Harry's dilemma is different in flavor, but deeper in root. He does not miss the pageantry, say friends, so much as the purpose it signaled. The drumbeat of service, the quiet dignity of standing for something that outlasts applause. Invictus gave him that for a time, a through line connecting uniform to mission. Hollywood meetings, however earnest, do not hum in the same key. And when the word Duke trembles on the page, so does a bridge to the only world that ever felt entirely legible to him. For Meghan, the calculation lives on different axes: image, control, legacy. She has fought to narrate herself honestly, to be seen without someone else's caption beneath her photograph. But narrative control is a paradox. The more you grab, the more the audience feels the fingers. Catherine's advantage is not just silence. It is the sense that nothing is being chased. She does not sell a story. She allows one to accrete. That is infuriating to compete with because it looks like ease and feels like inevitability. Inside Montecito, the professional cavalry has been summoned and resummoned. Veteran media hands, high-end brand strategists, legal minds with velvet, pens. They map options on glass walls, sequencing, platforms, tone pivots, partnerships that might launder skepticism into goodwill. And still, the basic math resists. A single palace notice could shear the titles from every chyron, every program. Note, every shelf nameplate. The finances might endure. There are contracts and catalogs, but the glamour that turned open doors into automatic doors would be gone. No more paradox of insider-outsider, no more rare vantage. Just another famous couple with a recognizable surname and a crowded calendar. In a city full of such couples, that is not a distinguishing trait. Supporters feel the weight too. Even among the faithful, fatigue accumulates like dust on the piano. Light at first, then visible. They have defended, explained, reposted, reframed. But the beats repeat. a new deal, a fresh platform, the promise of unfiltered truth. The public dutifully leans in, once, twice, 10 times, and then begins to ask the impolite question, to what end? A story cannot live forever on the energy of departure. Eventually it must arrive somewhere and set a table. Meanwhile, the palace remains fluent in its native language, composed silence. If there are meetings, they are not leaked. If there are drafts of statements, no one is mouthy enough to hint. The institution's confidence is the confidence of stone. It has outlasted 5 centuries of storms and does not chase weather reports. William and Catherine's Forest Lodge move is held up in courtyards and clubs as a case study in how to speak by inhabiting a room. The cameras were given just enough. The public was trusted to interpret what they saw. They did. High society follows these cues with precision. Rooms that once warmed at the Sussex entrance now wait to see which way. The mercury tilts. Some alliances pause, others quietly unspool. It is not personal so much as gravitational. Influence orbits stability, and stability has reasserted itself in Windsor brick and careful smiles. None of this means Meghan and Harry are finished. It means the playbook must change. Borrowed heat cannot keep a hearth lit. The moves that once made headlines, documentaries, interviews, pointed podcast monologues, now risk reading as reruns. If the titles stay, the margin for misstep is thin. If the titles go, the margin vanishes, and the work must stand without the crown's silhouette framing it. Back in Montecito, the storm stays indoors. Staff whisper about mood and momentum, consultants bring decks, lawyers wordsmith hypotheticals. Meghan walks well-worn paths between rooms, phones and printouts in hand, toggling between future scenarios. She has built and rebuilt before. Resilience is not her problem. The problem is oxygen. Where to find it that does not come pre-owned by the very machine she left. Harry, in quieter moments, scrolls not the feeds, but the past. Images of service, of teammates who still call him Sir, with affection unconnected to headlines. He wonders where a man like that belongs when the bridge is pulled up. He wonders what kind of work would let him sleep without the blue light of a screen making promises it can't keep. He wonders if purpose can be remixed without feeling counterfeit. Across the ocean, Catherine continues her unhurried march through daylight, a hospital visit, a school garden, a museum wing where she nods longer than the cameras capture because the curator is telling her something delicate and she cares to hear. William keeps his calendar's promises. Together, they look like the future, because the future is the job they are already doing in the present. It is maddeningly simple. It is why the numbers keep smiling. The Sussex brand can still choose a narrower road, less spectacle, more practice, fewer announcements, more delivery. Not a rebellion against the Crown's theatre, but a refusal to stage one of their own. A portfolio of work that does not require its audience to remember a title. Before it can see the point, it would be slower, it would be smaller, it would be sturdier. It would also be the only convincing answer to Windsor's unanswering gaze. And the titles? The decision, when it comes, will likely arrive the way these things always do. From nowhere and everywhere at once. A line in a bulletin, a shift in the style guide, an absence that says as much as any presence could. If they remain, it will not be a pardon so much as a warning. Spend this carefully. If they are removed, it will be received as inevitability by those who have been waiting for the other shoe to forget it was ever laced. Forest Lodge did not break the Sussexes. It revealed the seam. It showed the public what composure looks like in an era addicted to confession, and it measured everything else against that quiet. Meghan and Harry will go on. How could they not? Fame does not evaporate. It rearranges. But the monarchy has made its preference plain without saying a word. The house with history chose occupants who know how to live in it. The rest, for now, is weather on the far coast, impressive from a distance and powerless against stone. Here's the closing section to complete the script within your 1,800 to 2,000 target range. Night falls differently over Windsor than it does over the California coast. In Windsor, dusk collects on stone and stays, an old, quiet confidence. Lamps glow against brick, footsteps soften on gravel. A page in the national story turns without creasing. In Montecito, the sky performs, lavender into ember. But the light feels restless, moving across glass as if it is looking for something it cannot name. Meghan walks, phone in hand, reading the day's interpretations of lives that used to be her neighbors. Harry lingers longer by the doors that open onto the lawn, listening to a world that once opened for him on command, and now opens for him only when he asks gently. Forest Lodge was never an attack. It was an affirmation. By doing the ordinary thing in the royal way, quietly, properly, on time, William and Catherine reminded the country what continuity looks like when it isn't advertised. That is why the photographs were so soft and so final at once. No statement needed, because the statement was the house, the keys, the move-in boxes, the calendar unrolling exactly as expected for a future king and queen. The public didn't have to be told what it meant. They recognized the shape by instinct. For Meghan and Harry, recognition used to be automatic too. Now it must be earned, piece by piece, without the amplifier they once wore like a cloak. If the titles remain, they will carry conditions that cannot be printed. If they are withdrawn, the work ahead becomes simpler and harder in the same breath. Do something so steady, so useful, that a title would be redundant anyway. That is not glamorous labor. It is, however, the kind that lasts, and so the contrast stands. One couple settles into a house that belongs to the story. The other must write a story that belongs to them. Perhaps that is the fairest outcome the public could ask for. The monarchy keeps its grammar. Meghan and Harry keep their pen. What they put on the page next will matter more than what's still embossed on the invitation. This is the image to leave on. A lighted window at Forest Lodge, a figure passing behind the curtain, a routine beginning that will carry on long after. The camera blinks. Across an ocean, another lamp clicks on in a California study, and a cursor waits for the first true sentence of a new chapter. The wind is different in both places, but it is wind all the same, moving forward, indifferent, to noise, faithful only to direction.